My name is Andrew Dix. I'm the founder of the Crowded Media Group, and we're the publishers of Crowdfund Insider. We cover online capital formation as well as a full stack of fintech. And today we have a great subject to discuss. It's how do you successfully raise money online in a crowdfunded securities offering? And I know that this is an ongoing topic of discussion in the space. And fortunately, we have multiple years of experience now, as the Jobs Act was signed into law in 2012. It took a number of years for the regulators to get all the final rules approved, but all the exemptions have been made available since 2016. So we have a lot of experience under our belt. And today we have three experts that are going to share their wisdom as to how you can accomplish your goals of raising capital for your company. We have both Dealmaker and Dalmore here today. They are platforms that enable online securities offerings. These two platforms have emerged as two of probably the hottest enablers of online capital formation in the industry. And there's many reasons for that, but they both do the full stack of securities exemptions. So they have a lot of experience there. And then we have Jason, who is one of the key enablers in the PR marketing world that has been focusing on this space. But I'm going to ask each of our panelists to take a minute to share who they are and what they do. And I'm going to start with Stormer there. If you could say hello to everybody and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Hey, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Stormer Santana. I'm the Director of Sales at Dalmore Group. Maybe just a little bit of background. Dalmore's been a broker-dealer for about 20 years now, and we're laser focused on online fundraising. So we support all exemptions, Regulation CF, A+, Regulation D. And really our focus is to support from broker-dealer perspective, getting you as an issuer to leverage these exemptions and go to market and raise capital, as well as providing the technology to do so on your own domain in a white labeled solution. Been fortunate enough to onboard over 1,000 issuers. Those issuers have gone on to raise just about $2 billion in capital. And I've been in the crowdfunding space for about 4 years now. I find it so fascinating and really looking forward to the conversation here with the group.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Stormer. Jason, tell us about DNA.
Absolutely. First of all, excited to be here. Andrew, just saw you in action in Washington, D.C. at the CFPA conference. Noticed immediately you were in your element. You had the crowd going, the SEC, FINRA, everyone was in attendance. So to be part of your webinar the next day is a big deal for me. Also to share the stage here with Jonathan Stidd. I've been following John since the Ridge Growth days and closely at Dealmaker. And it's really an honor to be alongside one of the top marketers in this space. And Stormer, my first panel with you, but I'm an Tom Butler fan. So to be here in conjunction with Dalmore and Dealmaker, I blocked out extra time on my calendar. And I run a marketing agency called DNA. Have worked with over 500 issuers directly that have collectively produced 9 figures of capital through content marketing, advertising, and outreach. I showcase a lot of the results on my podcast, Test Optimize Scale, along with other writing pieces and workshops, and looking forward to getting into depth about what works and does not on these types of marketing initiatives here today.
Thank you, and thanks for the shout out there. You're right. I'm a total geek and dork when it comes to this stuff, especially the really boring stuff like regulations and rules. I just love it for some reason. All right, John, good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise, and thanks for having me on, Jason. I'll just echo that sentiment after saying thank you. I appreciate that. You know, what we're all doing in this space is an important way to help companies raise capital on their own terms, right? We look at the capital stack as a spectrum, right? There's retail, there's venture, there's debt. We're enabling people to raise retail capital primarily. I know Stormer brought up Reg Ds, and we support those as well. But a roundabout way of saying that, I'm the CMO at Dealmaker. We enable companies to raise capital on their own terms through Reg A, Reg CF, and Reg D, primarily through our hub of tools to run a self-hosted raise, to reach more investors, build that vibrant community, and simplify your investor relations. In doing that, we've raised over $2 billion for companies. And like I said at the onset, we're all in this space together to make online capital raising mainstream. So it's a pleasure to share the stage with everyone here.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. So as I mentioned before, the Jobs Act was signed into law in 2012. Part of the Jobs Act had three elements to it that enabled online capital formation or securities crowdfunding. There was Reg CF, Title III, that today allows an issuer to raise up to $5 million online. There was Reg A Plus, a different exemption that allows a firm to raise up to $75 million online, along with some additional disclosure there. And then there's Reg D 506C. Reg D has been one of the most successful securities exemptions utilized in the United States for decades. But this new spin on Reg D allowed issuers to generally solicit, which is SEC speak for advertise. And this has helped to fuel an entire new industry of investment crowdfunding, where firms can raise money from both accredited and non-accredited investors online. And this is for equity, debt, rev share, safes, anything you can think of if you need to raise money for your startup or your fund, whatever it may be. I'll say this, that when things got started, there was a lot of initial excitement and momentum, but it has taken a few years for people to figure it out. And as I mentioned before, we have two providers or platforms here that have really been doing exceptionally well, kind of blowing the doors off of helping firms to successfully raise money. And then we have Jason with DNA, who is one of, or if not the top marketing firm that specializes in helping issuers to chart a course to raise money online, do so successfully. Because as we all know, it's not just if we build it, they will come, you list the offering, everybody's going to rush and give you money. It doesn't work like that. We all know that. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of work. So I want to divide up this conversation by starting with what you need to do, prior to launch, and then, during the launch, and then follow up, post offering close. So I'm going to go around the room here, and I'm going to start with a Stormer. What does an issuer need to successfully kick off a securities crowdfunding offering?
Thanks, Andrew. So it's a bit of a loaded question, and I think one that takes a lot of strategic thinking going into raising capital online. Right, to your point, you don't launch a Reg CF, a Reg A, or even a Reg D, and capital just starts flowing in. And so what we look at, and when we're working with our issuers, is really echoing the idea of going about the process methodically. And the common question is, like, how quickly can I go to live, and how quickly can I launch? And I like to say, right, like, we need to focus on the strategy to raise this capital. And so when we're working with our issuers and kind of putting that strategy together to support them, a huge component is marketing, and a huge component is the technology to provide, the transactional component, but really thinking about the strategy to go to market and raise capital. And so what I suggest to issuers is, in that onboarding period where you're prepping to launch and you're working with counsel, communicate, start getting out there and start, creating awareness for the business, and start echoing that to your current network. And that might be small, it might be robust, but the more communication, the more touch points you can put out there into the ecosystem of fundraising, the more familiar these investors are going to be when that offering is qualified to raise capital. And so every offering is unique, and I don't think there's like a blanket statement in terms of what issuers need to do to go live. And I mentioned we support CFs, we support A's, and we support D's. Some of those D's and A's are perpetual issuers, like funds, real estate projects, and those that are offering maybe like a bond perhaps. And then there's Reg CF, which might be tackling that early seed round or Series A. All of those types of companies have different marketing strategies and different go-to-market components that need to be tailored to the offering at hand. And so depending on the audience for this webinar, if you're a startup, you're looking to raise, the next $2-3 million in seed capital, I would be creating as much awareness and as much communication with your customers and with your existing audience as possible, so that when that offering is qualified, there's a sense of familiarity, there's a sense of comfort, and that the education has almost started before that offering is qualified. And now there's nuances, right? There's test the waters. We might get into that, and there's some compliance that has to be going into how you're communicating. But the offerings that I've seen perform very well is when there's leadership that's vocalizing the excitement for the business and starting to create some buzz around the upcoming initiatives.
Okay, awesome. So I think one of the key takeaways of what you said is audience and community and creating that buzz. John, can you kind of expand on that or share your thoughts?
Yeah, certainly. I strongly agree with Stormer's points there around founders willing to take sort of center stage in that. I think sometimes it gets lost, and there are ways that we all enable, just referring to Delmore and Dealmaker, right? Enabling companies through technology to do this, but it is a capital raise, and people are investing in the founder and the company and their story to do that. So them being vocal advocates of their campaign and being the face of it is really important, right? Because that the digital distribution that you spoke about earlier, right? Mass solicitation, there's a pro and con of that. Pro is that it's now digital. Con is that it's it is digital, right? And you want to give somebody the feeling in the face of that, and people are ultimately investing in the founder and their story. So to Stormer's point, I would say that people really need to prepare to do that before the raise, during the raise, ongoing updates, right? And really nurture their community, because that's one of the benefits to doing this digitally and building up a community and keeping them up to date with content, right? But I mentioned the storytelling aspect there. That's one of those foundational pieces I think some folks miss, right? Like, if you're raising any type of capital, you need a strong story in a pitch deck, right? And sometimes people come to us a little before that, right? And it makes our work or, Jason's work on, marketing this. Or it's like, to build a strong marketing strategy and the underlying tactics, it does need to start with a strong positioning of the brand, right? And more often than not, obviously the founder and the executives at the company do have that story, but sometimes it just needs to be pulled out a little bit more to how do you present that in a pitch deck, which then gets translated into marketing material. So yeah, I would start with that really foundational piece, having your story and your pitch in good standing, both in terms of verbal positioning of it and the visual positioning of it, right? Like, nobody wants to invest in a company that looks like it's from the 90s, right? So if your pitch deck looks like that, if your website looks like that, if your social media is kind of a ghost town, right? Like, people are like, oh, is this even a company? So having some of those foundational layers that convey trust and convey the story, and then enable the marketing teams to do their role to take that story out of there and then put it in ads and emails and that sort of thing. Because again, back to the pro and con of digital, right? You need to be able to convey this quickly in a thumb-stopping ad, or you only have a couple seconds. So, and I know Jason's shaking his head there. It's like, we get that, trying to translate these assets. So yeah, I'll pause there. I'd say it's, really about the story and building some of those foundational pieces so that the marketing work and the digital components of this that should be valuable and can propel the campaign, because it's got to start with that story.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on community, because I think when I think of community, I'm thinking of customers and clients, people that are buying my service or product. Okay, this can be helpful. You don't always have a big community if you're early stage. You're trying to create a product or service that has value. But then also social media. So, Jason, if I'm somebody who is, doing a startup and I've got 1 million followers on X, I've got, thousands of people on Facebook, and I'm big on TikTok, what is DNA going to tell me to do with those, those characteristics?
Sure. I could try to guess the story based on the social channels and where the audiences are congregating there. But I think John is pointing us in the right direction of start with the story. That's what's going to captivate these audiences, even if they're already followers on your social channels or your email. Audience can be a predictor of how much traffic, how many conversions, how many investments you get in the early stages of your campaign, which is crucial for a crowd sale. You need to be able to showcase some traction. Everyone wants to be first. To be second is a motto that's used in offline capital raising. You see a large anchor investor come in the next day, the next week, people who have been in discussions with the team, then move forward. That the same is true of digital, pros and cons. As John was saying, cons, yes, you have to do it in a very small window of time. Pros, it can add to scale, but you have to start with your audience. If there are no investments, no investors that are being pointed to on the page, it's an empty restaurant sensation. So if you're able to max out how many of your email recipients are showing up on that page, those million followers on X, the smaller amount on Facebook, the TikTokers, you're able to get them there and see them convert. And that is the important part. And the conversion rate I would point to as the most important metric in the stack of analytics, because I've seen issuers with large audiences that simply did not respond. I believe it's because of messaging and that storytelling, because retail, I mean, you could come in at $100, $500, depending on what the filing dictates. But it's more than just having the community. You want to build out a marketing strategy in these pre-launch stages. You want to have a content calendar for each ongoing chapter of the campaign, talking about what's going to be published where and when. Is the X audience going to see something different than the TikTok audience? Hopefully they are. Who else is going to be repurposing this content? It's all about social sharing and tapping into those, third-party audiences. They matter more than just what you're saying to your audience as a brand. And as part of that content calendar, continuing to demonstrate social proof. People don't believe what they see online. So pointing to all the great things you're doing each week throughout the campaign.
Yeah, so let me flip this around. And remember, this is before you launch the securities offering. What if I come to DNA and I say, look, I got this great idea. This is going to become a multi-billion-dollar company, but I have no audience. I've got 10 followers on X, 150 on Facebook, and what's TikTok? Do you just do you say, dude, just there's another guy you can go to and he'll take your money? Do you say, we can fix this, or we can help you, or this is a heavy lift, we can give it a shot? I mean, how do you manage somebody like that? Especially if you got some boomer coming up to you and say, what's social media?
Building an audience from the ground up. I do want to talk about the importance of your audience briefly. I like quoting Woody Sherwood-Nice said at the CFPA conference yesterday, 80% of investors are first or second degree contacts. First, second degree network. So really utilizing your own network, people you've talked to forever, and being able to leverage even those smaller amounts on each of those channels, as you're saying there, Andrew. You can run advertising campaigns to grow social audiences. You can run advertising campaigns to grow your email list, even inviting them to webinars similar to this, perhaps an investor pitch type of format. I've seen everything from pitch deck presentations to town halls to fireside chats with other industry leaders. There's a lot of different ways, shapes, forms that can take place. It does not need to be paid media. It can be more of a grassroots effort. And those people in your network, if they have a sizable, responsive, loyal audience, that they can be pointed towards your social pages, shout out swaps. I've seen shout out swaps with founders, where a founder is saying, hey, I invested in this company that's doing a Reg CF over there. You've invested in me. I would take a look at that one. And then on the reverse, the same things occurring. That's typically with issuers who already have success. But there are plenty of ways to build that pre-launch audience with paid media, organic media, earned media, and you're not supposed to prime before a Reg CF campaign goes live. The marketing that leads into it pre-launch should be an ongoing effort, not just looked at as something that's for the immediate spike of the campaign. You could do this in a test the waters and leverage that time to build up reservation lists beyond the social media and email audiences.
Okay, so you accept all comers. DNA says, we'll put a package together for you. We can't guarantee anything, but if somebody comes to you with zero audience, you take customers like that?
Yes, and I'll explain why. First of all, planning, plateaued, scaling. We work with clients at all different profiles, that they could take on. The ones that are plateaued are the toughest, but they can be the most rewarding. The ones that are in planning are in many ways ideal as an agency because you're able to control the whole strategy. But I've worked with groups that had little to no audience that I had question marks around and communicated those transparently with the client, and they capped out their Reg CF. Took a bit longer, more of a 6 to 8 month push versus some of the faster rounds I've seen out there. But if I were to only be going off my predictions, I would have been wrong many times.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, I'm right there with you. So, Jason, you mentioned TTW, testing the waters. Stormer, there are two securities exemptions, Reg CF and Reg A, that allow this. And basically for the audience, testing the waters effectively means you can promote a potential securities offering without going through the filing process, without committing to raising the money, to see if there is sufficient interest to actually pursue a sales online. And it's very interesting. And when this first became an option for the industry, there was a lot of excitement about it. And I think people, the rush to do it, and then they found that it wasn't always successful. That being said, I think that the industry has a lot more experience today with preparation for an online securities offering. So, Stormer, what are your thoughts on TTW? Is this something you should do, shouldn't do? Sometimes, what's your spin on this?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Test the Waters. And just for everyone listening, there's basically 3 elements to a Test the Waters campaign. There's no disclosure of terms, so there's no discussing share price. There's no obligation to the investor to actually execute a trade, and there's no money capture. And so really what the goal of a TTW campaign is to go out to your existing community and start essentially vocalizing the idea of a potential offering in the future. And the goal of that investor is hopefully to express interest in participating. And, Andrew, to your point, the idea of success or failure with TTW, I think success is a subjective metric to be basing it off of, because to your point, I have seen big TTW campaigns not see that conversion. I've also seen companies that were hesitant about crowdfunding have an overwhelming response of participation in TTW. So I'm a firm believer that it should exist, that it should be a part of the strategy to go to market for a Reg CF offering, with the proper expectations that those conversions are not going to be as high because the investor doesn't know what they're investing in from a deal term perspective, that it's going to take a few touch points to convert that investor into someone that's a stakeholder. But that it can be so powerful. And the reason it's so powerful is you are building a warm list of potential stakeholders for your offering. And so I'm not sure why you would rule it from the equation, because at the very least, it's building that network and that community. So I'm a firm believer in it. I've seen great success come of Test the Waters. I think there is some education and maturity that needs to happen in the industry to allow for more Test the Waters success. But I think if an issuer goes into it with the idea that, hey, I'm going to start vocalizing the potential of an offering, I'm going to get my community excited, I'm going to create awareness for the potential of this next coming raise, so that when that offering is qualified to raise capital, your community's warm, they're slightly educated, they're familiar, and this is not the first touch point that they're receiving from the company. So that's kind of my thoughts on Test the Waters. I'm a believer for sure.
Okay, that's good. John, so do you agree with everything that Stormer said? What are your thoughts on TTW?
Yeah, certainly. I'm also a believer. I think it's most impactful when a company already has an audience of sorts, and that could be intertwined with what Jason was saying there about some of the great stats from Woody around, a lot of these investors are, in that founders group anyways, right? So it may not even have to be an email audience that you have or a past investor list, right? It can be people in your audience. I think it's most impactful in those scenarios. So if you have a network that you can go out to, it's, hey, I'm thinking about raising capital this way, or whatever the legalese that you have to put in there for the testing the waters. Would you be interested in reserving shares, right? And going out to your audience that way, or if you have a large customer list, depending on the type of your business, doing it that way. My hesitations around testing the waters are when companies are paying to acquire those reservations, right? You're working with somebody who's, net new to your brand. It's a new experience for them. It's easier to reserve shares than it actually is to invest, right? So if your offering goes live and you do have that gap of, this person isn't familiar with your company or your brand or wasn't a stakeholder in some way before, you acquired them probably through paid media, which means you paid for that reservation. I think that can be a false signal to customers. And I'm worried about paying twice for acquisition, right? In those cases. So yes, very pro testing the waters. I love that it's a possibility for companies to do as the name implies, test the waters. I do think it's most impactful when you have an existing audience, so you don't have to leverage paid media spend to acquire potential investors that may or may not invest when the time actually comes. And then, let's say you are, it takes longer to get your financials reviewed or something. So, now you're 45, 60, 70 days out from that initial reservation. Well, that person may have done something else with that $1,000 that they said that, they wanted to reserve shares in. So some pros and cons.
Yeah, there are pros and cons. Do you see any sort of industry average for, percent of conversions, or is it across the board for people do TTW?
Yeah, we've seen those stats really vary, and it goes back to that source of the audience that I mentioned before, right? Just trying to think of a good example. I mean, companies that have run it to past investors, say they've done a Reg CF, it oversubscribed, you're gauging interest for the next round, right? We see a higher conversion rate from those folks, which makes sense, right? They're investors. Or we've seen strong conversion rates from companies that have an intimate relationship with their list. I'm trying to think of the example without saying the company, but
no, go ahead.
They're not just like a passive, customer. They love this brand, right? It could be something that they like a soap, right? Like they're like, oh, I love this brand. They're like customers, long LTV with this brand, right? Versus potentially something that's more transactional, where they were just ordering this service for a ride or something like that, right? It's like the customer, anyways, the stickiness of that customer and their brand affinity also have something to do with that. And it correlates to how likely they are to raise around with you. Are you a brand that they love, or is it, some sort of transactional aspect? You go to park somewhere and they, hit you with the app to pay. And it's like, well, I only downloaded this app so I could pay for the parking space. I don't care about this brand. So if you have 150,000 email addresses and you're that parking app, right? That also has a terrible user experience. I had this happen last night, but that's why the example's fresh. But 150,000 of those email addresses are not as impactful as 5,000 customers with repeat purchases, that sort of thing.
Okay, so I would like to interject here that I think that TTW is a great tool, but there's also the question of terms, because how many times personally, I've said, okay, this is an interesting company. I sign up for it, but you don't know the deal terms. The deal terms come out and you're like, whoa, this valuation is insane. I'll never touch that. So yeah, I hear you. Pros and cons, great tool. Conversions can vary, but it is kind of something, new and different in the, securities sector. And I think it's absolutely can be, beneficial to issuers who want to raise capital online. So let's move on. So we've launched a securities offering. Your Reg A has been qualified. You've filed your Reg CF. Maybe you're doing a side-by-side Reg D. You got everything up and running, and all of a sudden, you're out of the gate and it's crickets. You have bad velocity, Jason, and this happens to be, one of your customers that you've, promised amazing things, and you're slow out of the gate. How do you manage that? What does DNA do if you're off to a slow start?
Sure. And unfortunately, when you look at the stats for the industry, this is a common scenario. And many of the groups that we work with are already live and want more traction, even if it's working, by the way. They want to see more investors come in faster. So I try to take somewhat of a systematic approach towards it and look to have conversations with the client around what we can do and what we can't. We can get traffic to an offering page. We could manage the audiences, the creatives, the funnels that we're taking these audiences down. These are variables. These are variants. We can A/B test and come to the table with new audiences to go after, new creatives, the funnel. I mentioned the webinar sign up, that there's various different ways you can approach that. If you're not getting the end conversion from traffic you're driving to the deal, can even do that within each channel and look to test out new channels. We always have assumptions going into a campaign of what's going to work, but we need the data, the analytics to show us physically what is getting the response, and then optimize towards that. My whole philosophy is something I say a lot is test, optimize, scale. If tests aren't working, we need to roll out new tests. We need to optimize towards what's working best, or to the individual pockets of performance within any of those activations, and then look for opportunities to scale. It is tougher if under 100K is raised. And when I look at the stats for Reg CF, less removing campaigns that don't report, 50% of issuers don't surpass that 100K. Quoting Brian Belay from King's Crowd, again, I like pointing towards those who are doing the research. And even just in the event this week, which plenty of other stats are published on King's Crowd, 30% of Reg CF issuers surpassed 300K, only 10% surpassed the $1 million mark. He listed out 19 Reg CF issuers since the beginning of 2023 that hit the full 5 million. And I know last year alone, though, there was 11 and 1,434 Reg CF issuers, less than 1%. So again, this is more common than not. And I believe optimization is an ongoing quest. I also want to make sure there's enough traffic getting to the deal, because if there's under 1,000 visits, or any number that's just not going to produce the necessary amount of investments, there's a chance they're getting a good conversion rate and just need more traffic and from the right audiences. We're brought to the table in many of those scenarios. And I've worked with issuers that were stuck, about to quit investment crowdfunding, in some cases about to go under. We were able to run a minimum level ad campaign, see results, lean into it. They did a rolling close, reinvested the capital, portions of it back into marketing, and they grew and grew and grew from there. So I even have traffic goals that I look at beyond the investment goals and try to dissect where in the algorithm performance is falling off.
Okay, well, let's take the opposite. Say you have great velocity out of the gate. Do you guys say, call it a day? Let's go hit the local pub and celebrate, or I'm assuming you hammer the accelerator.
I'm happy to answer that. I want to make sure I'm not taking the microphone too much here, but I'll give one example There was a campaign we worked on last year, and it took 4 months to hit $1 million. And they had a successful campaign the year before that did over that amount. There were question marks on whether to continue during that period. It then took another 2 months, so up to month 6, to hit $2 million, and very in-depth conversations on whether we should continue or not. And I'm looking at the funnel, I'm looking at the retargeting audience, I'm looking at how many people are watching the deal. And we changed up some of the creatives in the retargeting pool. The next month, month 7, they hit 3 million. So a lot quicker, $1 million in a month. And then in the last 3 weeks, they did another 1.5, and they could not get authorization from their board to extend past 4.5 million. It actually went from 3.6 to 4.2 to 4.5. And they had a waiting list beyond that. So if we would have stopped early, they would not have realized those results. If we would have said, at different points where there were a lot of conversions occurring, hey, let's just keep it running as is, we would not have been able to get up to those next levels. We scaled dramatically, and scaling can be tough. You could end up spending more and getting the same amount of conversions and essentially paying more in terms of the cost per acquisition of each investor. You really have to be delicate on how you look at the analytics, how you increase the pacing for any of those audiences, any of those channels, so that you're actually producing more conversions out of the efforts.
Okay, Stormer, I know you've done over 1,000 securities offerings, so that's a good number. I think it was 2 billion that you've helped raise. So I'm certain you've seen it all. You've seen the home runs, you've seen the singles, and you see the pop outs in pursuing this. How does that work at your platform? Because I know you're big on data collection, and making certain that the issuer has access to the data. How does that work with you guys when you've launched the campaign, you're getting this information? How do you interact with the issuer to ensure that they're executing on a successful offering that's scalable?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to your point, right, with the volume of issuers that we've supported, we've seen every spectrum of quote unquote success and performance within offerings. And so what's important is to leverage the information, the data that's provided to you. So the technology, just in a quick summary, captures all of the analytics of the funnel, even to the point of creating unique funnels for different marketing efforts. So you can start getting granular in the different channels that you're targeting. And so what we encourage is our issuers to have 5, a dozen different channels running, right? One might be on LinkedIn, one might be a webinar, paid marketing, of course, and then analyzing those. And that's often coupled with a marketing agency. And so, when we're working with issuers, we're kind of consulting and guiding the strategy for issuers to go to market. Oftentimes, and most oftentimes, it includes an agency. And so, atypical to most broker dealers, we're not providing distribution or lead generation for our offerings. We really look at these exemptions as tools, and we support those issuers to leverage these tools in whatever their goals look like. And for some, it's, I need to raise a lot of capital. Others, I need to increase my investor count because I want those investors to be our customers and to, fulfill that kind of life cycle of becoming a stakeholder, becoming a customer, continuing to support the venture. And so what we look for is, what type of issuer are you? What's your goal? How much capital are you looking to raise? What strategies are in place? And then trying to partner them with the appropriate marketing channels and marketing agencies. And then really leveraging the data as it comes through the investment funnel. We work with a lot of Reg Ds. We speak with a lot of funds where they just typically take on accredited investors. Maybe $50,000 checks are the minimum. And explaining that Reg A can be a really powerful vehicle to obviously broaden your investor horizon, broaden your investor pool, knowing that the tickets will be smaller. But as those investors become more sophisticated, participate throughout the years, they're eventually going to hopefully graduate to become an accredited investor and then continue to fuel deals. And so that's kind of the long-term life cycle to think of when leveraging these exemptions. And I think what's really important to think about as a founder, you're so focused on setting deal terms, working with counsel, meeting that launch deadline, partnering with a marketing agency to drive interest. I think it's often forgotten. What does the investor want to see? What does the investor look at and feel when they get your correspondence? And so thinking of it from the investor's perspective, if I'm an investor and I get one email to invest in a company I used once or purchased a product from once, it's probably next. But if I get continual touch points and I feel connected to that founder or that team, again, it's building that community. The conversions are going to increase dramatically. I just joined a new calendar app, and I'm getting daily emails from the founder of just widgets within the app, and I feel connected, right? I feel more empowered by the platform. If they were to ever reach out to me and say, hey, we might raise capital in the future, I'd entertain it because I've felt a connection. It's not just another tool in my suite of tech that I use. So that's kind of how we think about it is that full life cycle and building that long-term strategy.
Yeah, those are awesome points. Those are really good, and I believe that one of the things you guys focus on is just making the investment process super simple and removing as much friction as possible. So I think one of the things you guys promote is making it as simple as e-commerce. You see it, you want to buy it, click, boom, you're done. And I think that's important too. It's message, it's community, but it's also making the process simple and streamlined, because boy, I tell you what, I hate it when I have to jump through many hoops to get anything done, because my attention span's about 15 seconds. And you lose me, right?
That's exactly it. The top of the funnel, with Jason and John is optimizing and scaling. I think the purpose of technology is to remove friction and capture on that conversion. And so that's the goal is, there's nuances. You're signing legal documents, you're buying securities. It's not an e-commerce purchase, but the goal is to remove friction to the point that it feels like purchasing through e-commerce and having that frictionless experience. So that's our focus for sure.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. That's very good. So John, same thing. You guys have done a lot of offerings. You're pretty big. You've seen it all, from, what's your perspective on things?
Yeah, I thought the other guys here made some great points that I would just double down on, so that offering comes out strong out of the gate, right? Like, do you double down? And everybody said, yeah, let's double click on where that was. It could have been, just from their audience, right? So, how scalable is that initial audience? Well, now we got to reach out to net new investors, right? So if that were the scenario, I'd be looking for clues in what converted well in that audience of theirs to say, okay, here's copy and creative, right? That worked really well to bring them in. How do we frame that for net new eyeballs to the brand, right? And be scientific. I love what Jason mentioned about, thinking about like the conversion funnel. It's like, if we bring X amount of traffic in, right? Like those are the exercises that you have to do this well. And I would go so far as, there's going to be funnel touch points in there. Everything you guys said about conversion there is spot on. You want it to be as simple as e-commerce. Even in e-commerce, not everybody converts in one fell swoop. So you got to be able to follow up and have those touch points, whether that's like Stormer said, that ongoing communication, but which one? What did it say? Was it a webinar? Was it an email about their traction, right? So being able to dive deeper into the data and understand, okay, what brought them to the page? Maybe they converted there. If not, what in that sort of remarketing, right, and communications funnel made them come back and ultimately invest, because that's information you can use for your other campaigns and ultimately to scale that up and say, okay, can we keep putting our foot on the gas and drive this home? Or was that like a good initial bump and we want to use that traction and say, hey, we're a third of the way through the round already, like that sort of thing, and leverage it from there. But yeah, it comes back to data.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So I'm hearing a lot about data, and that's one of the benefits of raising capital online, and all you all are kind of sharing the different strategies to accomplish the goal. And I'm kind of curious. I'm going to start with you, Stormer, as to how much does your platform provide? One of the things has been kind of very important for the entire industry is picking your partners carefully, and you want to have an attorney that knows what they're doing, and they all say they do, but many do not. You want to have an accountant that understands the industry. You want to have a provider that has, has a track record. You want to work with a marketing PR firm that knows what they're doing. At what point, Stormer, do you guys say, we can do all this, but maybe you want to work with a marketing firm? Is there a hard stop between what you guys do, or to what degree do you provide those services in-house?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we partner with many different vendors in the space, from legal counsel to marketing, CPAs, video production if needed, and that's a really, really great component to have throughout the whole infrastructure of your raise. What we focus on is the broker-dealer component, which is the regulations, supporting the issuer, coupled with legal counsel to qualify to raise capital, and then powering the technology to do so. So those two are largely tackled at Dalmore. The latter portions, marketing, that funnel management, we look to industry experts to support with that, but it's very case by case depending on the issuer, right? Every issuer is completely unique, and I think agencies cater to all of those different types of issuers. Now, I think another thing you mentioned is counsel, and counsel is really important. You're selling securities here, and while we hear from founders oftentimes, hey, we're going to leverage in-house counsel, or we have a partner already in place. That's totally fine. It's great. I would caution, though, in making sure that counsel has experience with these exemptions,
Yes.
Because that can not only delay, the onboarding, the due diligence that we do as a broker dealer, if there's gaps, if there's pieces that are missing, and so we partner with heavily experienced individuals and teams to support our issuers, depending on their situation.
Yeah, John, same question. What do you guys, provide? I know you guys have lots of data, and that's going to the issuer, but where's that line where you guys stop providing certain types of marketing support and you engage with somebody like DNA, or is that gray? How does that work?
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, in addition to the data and benchmarks that we're going to supply, we can help guide customers. Like, here's what good conversion looks like for this stage of your campaign. So we have some tools and services that just supply them with that. We do offer in-house marketing capabilities, right? We think it's really important to make that a high touch service, right? Raising capital for companies is hard, right? It's hard work. The stakes are high, and we want to do well by them. So we intentionally are, working with marketing partners, right? Like Jason, to say, hey guys, like, we're full right now, and that's a good thing. Like, let's work with one of our certified marketing partners to say, hey, these are experts on this deal. They've worked with the technology before, and leverage that. To Stormer's point too, we also work with like a partner group, right? Whether those are accountants or legal experts, and having that conversation with a founder and saying, hey, I know you have counsel, but are they familiar with the regulations? Like, we've done this hundreds of times, right? So kind of helping customers like see that path, that, hey, it's important to do this with an expert, even if it's going to cost more. So yeah, we try to balance that sort of like, what can we support for them in-house, and then what's best out of house with the actual experts on that.
Okay, so it's kind of like a buffet system that you guys provide certain things, but then you can guide them for partners. That makes a lot of sense to me. I want to shift to, you've raised the money. You've raised $1 million. You've raised $5 million, $20 million. It's been successful, and this is kind of a personal beef with me, because I will go and look at offering pages, and I always go straight to the comments, because this is where people go to bitch if things aren't going well. And one thing that I think is really important is ongoing communication. And Jason, I know you're going to agree with me, but please share your thoughts and opinions about ongoing communication, what it should look like, what you should be sharing, following a successful securities offering.
Sure. Well, first of all, there's a saying in the industry of always be raising. And the sentiment behind that is an issuer, when successful, often refiles. It could be, immediately after, given the time periods. There could be a gap in between. Even when a founder tells me, yeah, we don't need more capital, or we're going to look towards outside sources to do so in the future. 6 months later, I'm getting a call from them saying, hey, we're doing another Reg CF. We're going to move to Regulation A+. We're going to do a 506C and target just accredited investors on this round. I'm a marketer. I don't believe the campaign ends on that closing date. I also read those comments. And if I'm launching advertising for those groups in the future, you want to talk about complaints. Look at those, social media comments. Some of them are brutal.
Yep.
We've worked with groups that did a reward crowdfund campaign in the past, didn't deliver, and then had to address that in future content pieces and town halls and things along those lines. And that's to say if it's for the right reasons. We have groups that have worked with us for years and haven't done a round in years, but monthly we'll do a webinar, even quarterly. I believe you get far more than just the capital from these individuals that are purchasing shares in your organization. I don't want to misuse the term ambassadors, but that's directly what founders share with me. I've seen everything from high valuable, customers, clients come out of these conversions after someone's invested. I've seen merger and acquisition activity. I've seen franchise requests. I've seen press opportunities. I've seen all different types of partnerships come from the individuals who invest into these deals. And the more you communicate with them afterwards, the more likely it is for those types of discussions to develop. Ongoing content marketing. I like to break down content marketing into the categories of social media, email, and long form content, including webinars, articles, videos, even the updates on the offering page, which can continue to hold posts and reach followers in many formats. So you can get more engagement that can lead to things beyond just capital. And of course, pull on those audiences for your next round. I could share other examples of groups that have run 4 campaigns, even 6 campaigns, different filings, different rounds with us, and building off those audience bases, even for additional purchases of shares and or social sharing to their audiences.
Yeah, so there's nothing that no better way to upset an investor and potential customer than to ignore them. You raise the money and then you vaporize, you disappear. That's one way to drive failure. At the same time, the rules require that you provide, for Reg CF, it's an annual update, and I know a lot of issuers have not been very good at completing this, and Reg A requires updates as well. Stormer, how does Dalmore communicate with your issuers to make certain that they're maintaining lines of communications? And I agree, you're always preparing for your next funding round. I know you guys have a lot of perpetual issuers, so I'm going to kind of assume that you have a lot of experience with these people that are just rolling over and doing one and another on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, of course. Actually, to support with that ongoing reporting requirements, our technology does have a calendar suite built in. So that calendar includes regulatory filings. It can include social posts. It can include items that we would, or the marketing agency would suggest to have as part of the infrastructure of the raise. So from a regulatory perspective, yes, there's the annual filing that's required. But I think just even harping back on the original point of what would an investor, if you were the investor and you invested in this startup, what would you want to hear? Or what would you want to see from the company? And that's just echoing that constant communication. It doesn't have to be a weekly email by any means, but if you're communicating on a monthly basis, I would be shocked if the discussion board, if the comment section was as negative, compared to going radio silent. And so, some of the most successful offerings that follow a Reg CF or that follow their first crowdfunding raise typically have that constant line of communication, whether it's through email, whether it's through the platform, whether it's through social, is just keeping your investors engaged. If you're a consumer-facing business, survey your investors. Ask them about the product. Ask them about what they want to see of your business, because they're stakeholders. They're invested in your company. And I think, one thing that hasn't really been touched on is just the power of LinkedIn. And so if you're a founder and you're thinking of going to raise capital, or you're raising capital, or you just closed your raise, post on LinkedIn, post genuine thoughts about challenges that you're experiencing with your company, or successes, or new hires. It could be absolutely anything. But what you'll find is you'll start to become that subject matter expert that people will look for guidance as someone who's gone through it. That'll increase the transparency, that'll increase the level of comfort when you do your next capital raise. And so I see a lot of success by founders who put themselves out there on social, like LinkedIn, for example, vocalize day-to-day, initiatives that the company's, executing on. It's going to make the narrative a lot tighter and a lot cleaner and a lot more exciting when you go to raise capital once again.
Yeah, awesome. John, I mean, how do you empower your issuers to communicate on an ongoing basis? I know you can't force anybody to do anything, but how do you guys manage this?
Yeah, and I wish we could, because like the guys had mentioned here, it's so important to the raise. Like, you can't just reach out when you're asking for money, right? You got to put yourself in the shoes of that investor and that you'd want to hear from them. And, to Stormer's point, it doesn't always have to be glowing. It's sort of like, here's what we're experiencing. We have an ask, right? We need a patent attorney. Retail investors come out of the woodwork to support the businesses like that, right? It doesn't always have to be some, like grandiose, like thought leadership that you're posting, right? Like, people just want updates. And to the extent that we can't force them to, we do try to enable them with tools and services to do that, right? Our platform Engage allows people to, have an updates page that also stores all of their documents, and the investors can log in there, right? So creating like a CMS like feature for them to support those updates where you can land those investors on, whether that's something that you're sharing on LinkedIn or an email that you sent out, having a central repository for them to send to. And then I mentioned the services, that ongoing sort of investor relations is a service we offer, because, while we all talk about it like it's simple, it's not lost on us that, founders don't have time, or they have the ideas and they just want it crafted into good copy, right? We can help customers do that to enable them to, like Jason said earlier about that always on strategy. Your raise may be off, but how do you continue to communicate to those investors in your community, right? Because that group isn't just investors, that's community that could be interested in your next round. So you really should be communicating to everybody. And we do that with the tools and services we provide at Dealmaker.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're running short on time here. There's a few questions I want to get to very quickly. There's one here which I find was kind of interesting. We haven't really addressed this. What about, somebody's asking about selling your products or services through a crowdfunding platform? And I think what they're referencing is the possibility of adding incentives to investment levels, and it's something that you don't always see, but sometimes you do see today, where if you invest $100,000, maybe you're an executive producer on a film. I mean, there's just all sorts of ways you can do this. Do you guys see a lot of that, Stormer? I lose you there, Stormer.
Oh, sorry, Andrew. Yeah, you cut out, but I caught the tail end of it. Do we see a lot of bonus shares or products being sold through our issuers? Apologies for that. I would say it's less common when you're doing a self-hosted offering, right? We often see it on platforms, the WeFunders, Republics, because there's that incentive mechanism to try and get their community to participate. My thesis is make that incentive great deal terms for the investor. Make it an exciting opportunity for investors to participate. And leave it at that. Keep it nice and simple, and that's kind of my thinking. But it can definitely be done in certain elements, as long as it's compliant.
Yeah, no, I'm going to agree with you there. Give me great deal terms. I don't care about a T-shirt or a ticket. I want to make money. Am I wrong, Jason? Is this something you guys incorporate sometimes?
When you're looking at competitor audits for issuers in your industry, when you're looking at target audience personas, there may be different drivers beyond just the capital. If someone's putting in $100, even $1,000, they may not be looking for the financial upside to the same degree an accredited investor would be on a Reg D, a 506C campaign. So I have actually seen the needle move with not just producer credits on entertainment films, but lunch with the director, if there's a high profile cast, there's other things that can incentivize an investor to go from, let's call it a minimum level investment, and that could be in their perspective, what that numerical amount is, to larger transaction values.
That makes sense. Okay, that's interesting. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would take some of the middle road there. I like what Stormer said. Don't over complicate it, right? Some people have these different tiers of perks and it gets really convoluted. This person could be a first-time investor and all of a sudden they're getting bonus shares and a product discount and that sort of thing, right? I will say one of the most successful ones we had in the past was working with VirtuX, who has this amazing VR gaming machine, right? And, as part of the investment, you also got a discount on the product when you bought the unit, right? That one was a really cool. And like Jason said, leveraging in the way to help people ladder up their investment, right? For different discount amounts at different investment tiers. But for the most part, keep it simple and core to the company, right? If the product is core to your company, then certainly use perks as a way to drive that, right? And now you have this supercharged customer shareholder that's out there, waving the billboard for your company as a product user of yours and a brand evangelist.
Okay, couple more questions. Stormer, I take the other side. What are some mistakes that you see? I mean, this is, I actually kind of like this because you always focus on success, but when you're, live and in the wild and you've seen a lot of, offerings, you've probably seen people that really bollocks things up and just, kind of did a train wreck. What are some of the mistakes that some people do that they shouldn't be doing?
It's a unique, but I think very important question to talk about. I often see a lot of challenges when issuers set a very, very hard deadline to launch their offering, as if that date is going to be the crux and the catalyst for their success in crowdfunding. And what comes of that is immense urgency and stress to launch on that specific date, when in reality, the date is not as important as the strategy to go to market. So it's kind of a long-winded answer of saying, use the time that you have in onboarding and prepping for the offering to have a really tight model to go to market, less so knowing that Friday of this month is going to blow the roof off of this offering. Because at the end of the day, the investors don't necessarily know when that offering is going to be qualified to raise capital. Right. And so as long as you're keeping that online, that dialogue going, you're getting your audience excited, the date is not as important. And so, I could dive into a million different things that I've seen issuers do that might not, drive a ton of performance, but where I see a lot of stresses comes from setting that hard deadline. Everyone's moving to launch as quickly as possible, but when you're forcing the launch, oftentimes the strategy is in lieu of that date. And that's where I see things maybe not perform as well as John, they were hoping for.
Yeah. What do you see that they shouldn't be doing, issuers should not be doing?
Yeah, I love that one from Stormer. I say it to customers all the time. Like, it's an important practice. We don't inherit somebody else's rush or, really try to guide them on what that is. I think those are great talking points. Like, we want to put together a really sound strategy for your offering, right? Tied into that is the first point I made, mistakes, getting out there without your stuff polished, right? It's like you're raising capital, have a strong pitch deck, have your brand look strong, right? You need to go through that positioning, because whether it's an ad that one of the investors sees or you're on a webinar and having to talk through some of these things, you need to have your positioning down, and that takes pre-work ahead of that. So I see people rush in and they want to get started and their pitch deck isn't even done, right? You got to have those things down pat.
Yeah, that's good too. Jason, I know you see a lot of, campaigns that they're flagging because, people can be, penny wise and pound foolish, and they don't want to, spend the money on DNA initially, and then they have regret because they're not getting the traction they want. What are some things that you see issuers do that they should not be doing? The big fails, the red flags.
Sure. So building off Stormer and John's comments there, filing delays, we see constantly. And pre-launch marketing, compliant pre-launch marketing could provide a lot of value towards those early stages of the campaign, which we discussed are so important. So marketing, don't leave it as an afterthought. Build a strategy early, start the pre-launch marketing early. Delays in bringing in their own audience. We want to see what happens with the campaign first. Then we're going to promote. We're influencers. We got to be careful with our brand. Don't bring your audience in late. Marketing launch, similar concept. As we get some dollars in, we're going to begin marketing. You really want to come out of the gate strong, have a larger retargeting pool, have more people watching the deal in early stages. Hesitations towards scaling, and too much of a focus on the return on ad spend, return on investment in building stages of the campaign. I get judged by performance. We're on the front lines of performance. The results are all that's going to matter to most issuers that we work with at the end of the day. But there are spikes during the closing. It typically rounds out to a much stronger level. And if you're seeing a moderate return on ad spend level, 2 to 3x, 3 to 5x, leaning into that, you may see that movement turn into 10x a few weeks, even a month, few months down the line, where if you're staying steady at more of a beginner level amount of marketing traffic, you may just remain at that slow pace. I see the most proactive founders have the most proactive campaigns, whether that's around the content creation or spending more on what's working, spending just being representative of bringing more audiences, bringing more publishing partners, bringing more channels to the campaign.
Awesome. Okay, so that's great. We're out of time. I want to thank everybody who are watching or will watch this webinar going forward. I want to emphasize that Dalmore, Dealmaker, and DNA, they're all available to help you guys. So reach out to these people. And if you're considering to raise money online to see if it's right for you, I want to thank Stormer, Jason, and John for joining us today and sharing your wisdom. And hopefully we will see everybody come back next month for our next webinar. So thank you all for joining us today.